Hello, I'm Bailey Leisure, and today on my channel I'm going to be doing a baseball video for the first time in a couple months as I'm going to be giving my thoughts on the first half of the 2019 Major League Baseball season. So some top stories in baseball that happened in the first half. So I think one of the big stories is Cody Bellinger and Christian Yelich. Both those players putting up huge numbers for their respective teams. Christian Yelich is proving that last season was no fluke. Cody Bellinger is, shaking off kind of the woes he had in 2018 after a very good 2017. He's just smacking home runs, both of them left and right, putting up huge offensive statistics. For Cody Bellinger and the Dodgers, it's definitely impacted them as, they're the top team in the National League going into the first half of the season. And Christian Yelich, the Brewers are still competing. They've kind of been struggling because of other areas, but they're still in the playoff hunt, still very much in the race for the division. So I think a big talking point to talk about has been the National League Central's kind of woes. It's not real. This is the most competitive in baseball, but it's really seems like every team is just tripping over themselves. Um, you know, going into this season, I knew that this was going to be the most competitive division, but it's competitive not for the reasons that you think it is. Both teams, not a lot of, just a couple barely above 500 teams for one thing. You look at the Cubs and the Brewers; they don't really look like World Series contenders, considering how hit or miss they've been. The Brewers have had, pitching has been struggling. The Cubs' kind of core has looked a lot older. The St. Louis, you would have thought with Paul Goldschmidt and stuff like that would have helped them, compete for a playoff spot, compete for a division again. That's not been the case. I mean, you look at Pittsburgh and Cincinnati. Pittsburgh. The only reason they're kind of still kind of in the hunt is for two reasons. Number one has been the rest of the top teams above them struggling, and number two, the emergence of Josh Bell. But their pitching's been kind of a question mark. I know Chris Archer, that deal has just not looked good for them. And then you look at the Cincinnati Reds, you looked at all the offseason improvements, and the offseason improvements don't look like it's impacting them, but even though they're in last place, I think they're within like 4.5 games or 5.5 games, less than 6 games of the division. So I got to think one of these two teams, or one, maybe two of these teams picks up a bit, and it looks like, the division's going to look better. But final story I'm going to talk about, I could talk about many stories, but I'm going to limit it to just three, has been the Anaheim Angels and kind of their season, which it's just been depressing. So obviously in the offseason, they made Mike Trout, the franchise player, gave him, a record-setting deal in baseball, and he's lived up to the hype this season. That's a positive. But you look at it, that people say you have the best baseball player in this generation and one of the best ball players in the last 20 or 30 years. You got to put something around him, and in some ways they have in their lineup. I mean, Justin Upton's been all right, but I think he just got injured before the All-Star break, or he's dealing with some injuries. Tommy La Stella has kind of emerged as like kind of that bat that they can put behind him. He's having a great he was an All-Star, almost got the vote for the top. I think one of the top second base or outfield spots in the American League. And then he got a broken bone in his leg, broken tibia, I think it was, and he's out 8 to 10 weeks. And that's not, you look at what happened with, just before the break, the controversial slide from Jake Marisnick of the Astros into Jonathan Lucroy, and that's another injured player. They've had a lot of injuries, and obviously, beyond injuries and stuff like that, the devastating loss of 27-year-old pitcher Tyler Skaggs, who was, starting to figure it out this season. He's kind of, he's had Tommy John surgery. He's had, he's had a lot of, kind of ups and downs in the last several years since the Angels got him back in that trade with the Arizona Diamondbacks years back. And it looks like he was starting to figure things out, and tragically, he lost his life at the age of 27, so it's definitely a real, just unfortunate season for the Angels, and I think tragedy in pitchers. They've experienced this before 10 years ago, but it's just, I think with the Angels, it's just a sad season for things on and off the field, and I can't even really criticize them for this because I mean they're going through things that not many teams have gone through. Um, so now I'm going to talk about my most surprising teams in baseball. The first team I'm going to talk about is the Minnesota Twins. I'm really shocked at this, because I looked at going into like I've stated before, going into 2018 after they went from in 2016 from 100 losses to 100 wins. In 2017, they were a wild card team. I'm thinking, okay, they can make that next step in the American League Central and take over the Indians. Was not the case. They regressed. They sold some pieces at the trade deadline in 2018 when they traded guys like Brian Dozier and Eduardo Escobar. But they've retooled, and some of those players, it looks like they just had an off year because they've been one of the dominant teams in the American League. They're very much in a playoff spot, looking like they're going to win the division. You never know? The American League with the Yankees and the Astros, they could take that number one spot for in the American League. So, but they, Byron Buxton, and Miguel Sano have developed a lot, or have bounced back, and some other great players that I'm going to put in the description of who's really contributed for them. But the Minnesota Twins have bounced back, and they've looked very good so far in 2009. The Texas Rangers, it's kind of an interesting, especially in the division they're in, that they'd be doing well. Now, I don't think the Texas Rangers will be a playoff team, but they got something going for them in the future. I think Mike Minor's really come out, and he's looked like a dominant pitcher for their staff. Joey Gallo, he has been incredible, and he's been a lot more consistent. He's the power's still there, and it's at its peak form right now. And, he's just smashing dingers. And, Texas, I know they're moving into a new indoor baseball stadium a couple years ago. So this is a good thing, and can create some goodwill for Arlington, knowing that, okay, we gave this team who's kind of struggled and has kind of hasn't, done, has either been a playoff disappointment or it's just been not great in the last several years. So we can, we're in a good mood knowing we're giving this team a new stadium, and they're gonna put some investment back into the field. So they're on the field. And then the Washington Nationals. Now, a lot of people said they were kind of a dark horse to compete in the National League East, which I think the Atlanta Braves kind of took that. But they had a really rough first 2 months, but they've looked a lot better since in the month of June, mainly because of Max Scherzer. Is looking like a Hall of Fame pitcher and looking like their ace that he's been for the last several years. Anthony Rendon has looked very good. I mean, they've looked more impressive than the Philadelphia Phillies, even considering that they lost their generational star in Bryce Harper. But it looks they're kind of just proving that we don't need them, and we can do what we have. I think the big concern is probably to re-sign Anthony Rendon, because I think he's up for a contract at the end of the season. So, but the Washington Nationals, they've bounced back, and they're looking like a pretty good wild card team. So that's something they got to keep it up. Will they keep it up? That's two disappointments of the 2019 MLB season in the first half. Like I've stated before, I'm going to just put in the whole National League Central is one of the biggest disappointments, considering how inconsistent all these teams have been and just how tight it is, but not for – it's a tight division, but not for the reasons that you think it is. It's not like each of these teams have 55 wins. That's not been the case. It's been just everybody's been inconsistent. Then we go with the Red Sox. We get the World Series hangover, but they've looked very inconsistent. I mean, they bounced back a little bit after a rough April, but I don't really see them winning the division. I think they can compete for a wild card, but it's going to take a lot. I mean, I got to think they're going to be one of the aggressive teams at the trade deadline coming up at the end of the month. And then the Philadelphia Phillies, I mean, they were the champions of the offseason, getting Bryce Harper, getting JT Realmuto, getting Andrew McCutchen, getting Gene Segura, just add some pitching and you'll look great. Well, the pitching struggled. They lost Andrew McCutchen to a torn ACL. He's done for the year. They lost him in May. Bryce Harper's basically at where he was at the end of the season, last season with the Washington Nationals. He's a .250 hitter. He wasn't an all-star, so he's got to pick it up. The only guy that's really fulfilled his promises probably it's been JT Realmuto. I think he was one of the only All Stars for them. So the Philadelphia Phillies, I think they can still compete for a wild card, but they got to get their pitching and their bullpen really figured out. I definitely think they're going to be one of the aggressive teams at the trade. Now the standings as of the first half, and my predictions on where these teams will finish going into the second half of the MLB season. So starting off in the American League East, the New York Yankees, even with all the injuries that they've had early on, they're starting to get those players back. But they're just the Yankees are dominating a division and are emerging as the favorites in the American League. So I mean, TJ LeMahieu's been really an underrated signing for them. They got Aaron Judge back. Obviously, Giancarlo Stanton's gonna, they got him back for a little bit, but now he's gonna be out till August. But their bullpen's looking great, headed by Zach Britton and Aroldis Chapman, and they're looking like they're going to be adding more pieces possibly at the trade deadline. So Tampa Bay in second, and they hold the first wild card spot. Even though it's kind of disappointing considering they were leading that division for a while until the Yankees emerged. I think they're where they're at, where I expected them to be going into the first half, and expectations for them was to be a wild card team, and they're at those expectations, so I think they should feel good about that. The Red Sox obviously have been disappointing, have had the World Series hangover, but they're still within wild card reach, and but I think they're going to have to be aiming towards the wild card unless the Yankees have a massive collapse, which you never know, it could be possible. But I think the Red Sox, I think a wild card is going to have to be in their reachable goals going into the rest of the season. The Toronto Blue Jays, I think the big story for them, even though they're rebuilding, I think the rebuild and blow up of their roster is complete. Now they have some interesting pieces, including Vladimir Guerrero Jr., who's just wowed us at his performance in the home run derby. And they have some couple other great pieces such as Gurriel, Yuli Gurriel from the Astro, his younger brother's on the Toronto Blue Jays. Craig Biggio's son, I think Calvin Biggio is promising. So they got some interesting pieces for the future, and it's not going to be here this season and maybe even next season, but in the couple years down the road, I think they'll be competing for the American League East. And then Baltimore, considering they blew up the rest of their roster last season, they're one of the worst teams in baseball right now. It's pretty much they're in full-on rebuild. In the American League Central, you got the Minnesota Twins, who are one of the biggest surprises in baseball. Cleveland kind of looked like they were going to blow it up, and they could sell some pieces at the deadline, but they currently hold the second wild card spot, and they're looking a lot better. And maybe even the division's not quite out of reach. I think they're within less than 6 games, but I think Cleveland's going to have to pick it up, and they got to figure out what they want to do going into the trade deadline, if we should sell or we should continue to keep competing. So we'll see what happens there. The White Sox are finally no longer a team that's is tanking. They got some interesting pieces, including Tim Anderson and a couple other players. So the White Sox finally, even though they didn't get Bryce Harper or Manny Machado, guys in the offseason that they were aiming toward, it's probably a good thing because they got some good pieces in their system. So the White Sox, they could be competing for a division in the future as well. And then in 4th and 5th place, you got the Kansas City Royals and the Detroit Tigers, who are shelves of what they once were 3 or 4 years ago. West, unsurprisingly, the Houston Astros are leading the division and one of the top teams in the American League. I think obviously, they've dealt with some injuries with Jose Altuve, Carlos Correa, George Springer. A lot of their core players have dealt with injuries, but Justin Verlander and Garrett Cole have been leading their rotation once again. I think the only concern for them is probably their bullpen to figure out a closer soon, so we'll see what happens there. Oakland, they kind of struggled in the first month, but you know how this team is. They go on these streaky winning streaks, and they're back within a wild card spot, as well as the Texas Rangers sitting at 3rd place, surprisingly, thanks to guys like Mike Minor and Joey Gallo, as I stated before. And then the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim, at 4th place, they're not quite out of the wild card spot, but I think pitching is definitely going to be a big concern for them going forward. And then Seattle, who were off to a 13-3 start and then just collapsed. And pretty much they're going on full on resale. We've already seen them move some pieces like Jay Bruce. So the only team that's really in the American League West that's not out of the division or out of a playoff spot potentially is the Mariners. Moving on to the National League. In the National League East, the Braves had a really rough first month. They've emerged, and they're the top team in the National League as I predicted. Really thanks to Ozzie Albies, Ronald Acuna Jr., and Freddie Freeman. So those three big bats in their lineup have really paid off for them. They obviously added, they got Dallas Keuchel, and I think they brought him up, so that should help out their pitching rotation. As I think there's a big question mark for them. The Washington Nationals have the first wild card spot, so they're thanks to guys like Max Scherzer and Anthony Rendon. The Philadelphia Phillies, even though they're kind of disappointing, they still, as of the first half, they do own the second wild card spot. So. I think a wild card spot is probably in the pipeline for both those teams, as I think the Braves will probably end up winning the division. The Mets, they've just had a lot of front office woes. The only reason they've kind of been decent has been Pete Alonso and Jacob deGrom, but they've had a lot of bullpen collapses. They've had, the Edwin Diaz trade has not worked out well for them. Neither has the Robinson Cano trade. So we've heard of stories of general managers throwing chairs at people, Mickey Callaway and a couple other Met players, going ballistic on reporters. So it's the Mets. Let's just put it that way. And then Miami in fifth place, in last place in the tripping and disappointing National League Central. Even though it's pretty competitive, but like I've stated before, not for the right reasons. The Cubs, kind of by default, are leading the division by, I think, like within a game. The Milwaukee Brewers are in second place. And the St. Louis Cardinals are in third, and the Pittsburgh Pirates are in fourth. The Cincinnati Reds in fifth place. But I think all these teams are within. If you include the Cincinnati Reds, it's a 5-game. It's 5 games or less that these teams are within each other. In the National League West, you have the Dodgers, who are pretty much, the top team in the National League. And it's pretty much not only their division in the National League West, but it's pretty much also their entire league that it's theirs to lose. They're just the dominant team in the National League, thanks to Cody Bellinger, obviously Hyun-Jin Ryu, and Walker Buehler, who have emerged as their top 2 guys in their rotation. It's no longer Clayton Kershaw is the ace of their staff anymore. And so I think that's good for them for the future, for the Dodgers. And then the rest of the division. So in second place is kind of surprising, the Arizona Diamondbacks. Now, if you told me at going into the 2019 season that the Diamondbacks would be above 500, just barely by I think 1 game, and would be within a game and a half of the wild card spot, I would have probably said, I'd probably take it. But, they've just looked so inconsistent due to their bullpen. The only thing that's really been positive for them has been Eduardo Escobar, who's been pretty good, Ketel Marte, who's just come out of nowhere and has just emerged as the top hitter for the future for them, and Zach Greinke, who's pitching some of the best baseball in his staff. But the Diamondbacks have really been plagued by injuries pretty much in every spot. David Peralta's dealt with shoulder issues. Wilmer Flores, who after a rough start was starting to get it going, but then he broke a bone in his foot. Luke Weaver suffered a UCL injury, although it wasn't a torn UCL. He's been dealing with some elbow issues. They have had 3 rookie pitchers in their starting rotation. Taylor Clark has not looked that great. And John Dupletier, if I'm saying that correctly, sorry if I'm not, was looking decent, but both him and Clark are on the injury list right now. Alex Young's played a couple good games for the Diamondbacks, but so far he's looked pretty good. Robbie Ray's looked kind of inconsistent. Merrill Kelly's been okay. So, and their bullpen, it's really just been is kind of a reason why they're not as good as they probably should be, or they think they should be. But they're in this, they're. I think the Diamondbacks within the next few weeks going into the trade deadline, it's going to be a question of what are they going to be? Are they going to be buyers or are they going to be sellers? So we'll see what happens to them coming out of the All-Star break. The San Diego Padres, I mean, Fernando Tatis Jr. Is looking pretty good. They got a really, Kirby Yates is looking great in the bullpen. I think Manny Machado, he's been all right, but he's not been that great. They got, like I've stated before, the San Diego Padres have a lot of great players, not only in their on their roster right now, but in the up and coming. So, we got to see what direction that they're going to take. The Colorado Rockies have kind of been a bit of a disappointment. I mean, Nolan Arenado, Charlie Blackmon, Trevor Story, and now David Dahl. They have the hitters, but when you play in that ballpark, in hitters' ballpark, you're going to have pitching struggles, and that's been the case for them, and why they've kind of regressed. And then the San Francisco Giants in last place, and it looks like this is the year where it's the they're and it's kind of just been unfortunate for them the way they've started this decade out to where they've ended. But I guess all good things must come to an end. Second half and my playoff predictions for the 2019 Major League Baseball season. So in the American League, I think the divisions will be the New York Yankees will win the American League East. The Houston Astros will win the American League West and be second in the American League. And then the Minnesota Twins will win the American League Central and be third. The wild cards, I'm going to go with the Tampa Bay Rays, and I think the Boston Red Sox will pick it up, and I think they'll take that second wild card spot. And in the National League, I'm going to go, obviously, the Dodgers. I mean, it's pretty much, like I've stated before, now the National League West is pretty much locked up for them, and I think the National League is pretty locked up for them. I'm going to go in second. I'll take the Atlanta Braves. I think they'll take the National League East, and we'll take that second spot in the National League. And then I'm going to go with the Milwaukee Brewers in third. And the wild cards, I'm going to go with the Washington Nationals as the first wild card. And then second, I'll take the Chicago Cubs. What were your thoughts so far on the 2019 Major League Baseball season? What are your predictions for the second half of the 2019 Major League Baseball season? So leave in the comments section below. As always, click like if you like the video, and subscribe if you like the content on my channel. And as always, follow me on Twitter at BaileyLaser96. And stay tuned for my NBA free agency recap video. I was going to come out with it before this video comes out, but more moves happened, so I gotta redo the video now. So sorry for the delay, but it is coming soon, hopefully within the next few days. So thanks everybody for watching, and I will see you all later.